Ben Shapiro sues Jonathan Roumie for defamation. The headline exploded across every major outlet. Within minutes, it was everywhere. Social media caught fire. News anchors scrambled. Podcasts, blogs, and legal analysts couldn't stop talking. And the internet, in its chaos, generated conspiracy threads before anyone had even read the official complaint. But what made this lawsuit seismic wasn't just its legal weight, it was who filed it and who it was filed against. Ben Shapiro, the hyper-articulate media mogul, known for his sharp tongue and aggressive style, had emerged from behind his empire to sue a man who almost never raised his voice. Jonathan Roumie, the actor known not just for playing Christ in The Chosen, but for speaking softly and living with quiet conviction, had become the target. According to the complaint, Roumie had knowingly spread malicious falsehoods about Shapiro during a live televised panel just 3 weeks earlier. The timing was either perfect or catastrophic, depending on whom you asked. Shapiro was embroiled in ongoing backlash from recent political commentary. Roumie had just returned from a National Faith Summit where his remarks about media manipulation had gone viral. Tensions were high. This was the match on dry brush. The lawsuit filed in federal court in San Diego cited Roumie's statement that Shapiro had inherited the worst traits of old guard political puppeteers and used his name and media power to move narratives from the shadows. That last part, the accusation of hidden influence, was, according to Shapiro's lawyers, what did irreparable damage to his reputation. The public split instantly. Shapiro's followers called it justice. Roumie's supporters called it intimidation. But Roumie, he didn't flinch. The morning after the lawsuit broke, he walked out of his modest Los Angeles home holding a cup of coffee. Surrounded by reporters, he smiled calmly and said, "If they think this will silence me, they've clearly never watched a single interview I've ever given." Then turning to the camera, he added, "They chose the wrong person." But behind the scenes, the pressure was mounting. This wasn't just noise. It meant sworn statement, discovery, cross-examinations, and public exposure, something the Shapiro camp had mastered. Roumie's lead counsel, Maria Delgado, a soft-spoken but razor-sharp defamation expert, warned her team immediately, they're not after money. They want blood, reputational blood. They want to see him squirm in court and flinch on live TV. Roumie's response? Then I'll make it worth watching. But that didn't erase the danger. Within 48 hours, conservative media outlets began digging. They unearthed old university talks, private speeches, anything that could be weaponized. Clips were taken out of context. Social feeds swarmed. It was a media storm, by design. In the eye of that storm, Roumie sat in silence one night with his father in the small, dimly lit living room of his childhood home in Yonkers. His father looked at him and asked, "Are you sure about this, son?" Roumie didn't answer right away. Instead, he asked quietly, "Why is it that the world only pays attention when someone gets hurt?" His father sighed, smiled faintly, and said, "Truth doesn't move, son, unless someone pushes it." But the real battle hadn't even started. Not yet. The footage wasn't grainy. It was HD, a roundtable political panel broadcast live just 3 weeks prior. The topic, the invisible influence of media dynasties in shaping public narrative. 4 guests sat on the panel, but only one cut through the noise. Jonathan Roumie. He wasn't there to argue. He was there to speak truth. Halfway through, the host turned to him and asked, "Mr. Roumie, do you believe that prominent media figures, especially younger ones, still hold power behind the scenes even without holding official titles?" Roumie leaned forward, no hesitation. "Absolutely, and not always transparently. People like to believe Ben Shapiro is just a commentator, a sharp debater. But the truth is he operates behind layers of intermediaries, steering narratives. And frankly, he's inherited the worst traits of old-school political architects." The room went still, not shocked but alert. The host raised an eyebrow. "That's a bold claim. Do you have a specific example?" Roumie nodded once. "Let's talk about the media cleansing cycle that started 2 days after I challenged a judge openly aligned with one of Shapiro's affiliated network. Ben didn't show up, of course, but 3 sources connected to that PR push, directly tied to his funding network. Pretending he's uninvolved? That's willful naivety. That phrase, willful naivety, was the one they built the lawsuit on. The panel went on. No one shouted, no one walked off. It was sharp, honest television. But in the weeks that followed, Roumie's words spread like fire, especially among conservative influencers. They accused him of targeting a private citizen, of seeking clout by dragging a respected figure through the mud. Roumie never retracted. In fact, 2 days later, he tweeted, "Power without accountability is a threat to democracy. If Ben Shapiro is playing political chess from the shadows, yes, I'll call it out, period." That tweet was included in the defamation suit as evidence of continued malicious intent. But anyone who really knew Jonathan Roumie could see this wasn't strategy, this was frustration. Months of watching public discourse bend under invisible pressure had built up, and now someone was pushing back. Roumie felt it in his chest like the ticking of a clock. Online forums were ablaze, but not with context, just with noise. Clips from the panel had been chopped, stripped of nuance, reposted without the rest of the conversation. What was once a calm, reasoned answer now sounded like a personal attack. In online echo chambers, Roumie was being portrayed as unstable, obsessive, even jealous. None of it made sense, but it spread like wildfire. Back in his quiet Los Angeles office, Roumie sat with his team late into the night. They rewatched the full panel from beginning to end. At one point, Roumie paused the video and asked, "Did I say anything untrue?" His strategist, Theo Mendelsohn, leaned back in his chair. "No," he said plainly, "but you kicked the hornet's nest." Roumie sipped his tea slowly, then answered under his breath, "Maybe it needed to be kicked." What neither of them knew, what no one in the room could have predicted, was that someone close to Shapiro had already seen this kind of manipulation unfold before. And that person had receipts, not rumors, not anonymous tips, documents, names, emails, and a timeline that would eventually bring the entire case crashing down. But before the explosion, Shapiro's camp made their first official move, and it was loud. The lawsuit wasn't rushed. It was precise, strategic, filed to the minute. A federal court filing dropped Tuesday morning, accompanied by a carefully worded press release, signed by Shapiro's lead counsel, Thomas Lake, a high-profile attorney known for defending billionaires and handling media crises for dynastic families. The statement read, "Mr. Roumie's comments are not only false, but were clearly calculated to harm Mr. Shapiro's reputation and personal safety. We will use all legal avenues available to confront this malicious behavior." The language wasn't chosen by accident. By mid-afternoon, conservative commentators were repeating the same talking points. A calculated attack, intentional harm, disrespectful recklessness. The messaging was airtight. Ben Shapiro, they said, had stayed above the fray, avoided politics, and preserved his integrity. This was an intolerable assault by a self-righteous actor looking for relevance. Inside Shapiro's sleek media war room in downtown Manhattan, the script was already written. Clips were preloaded, talking heads were pre-briefed, influencers were cued with pre-written tweets disguised as spontaneous reactions. The entire narrative was ready. Shapiro as the victim, Roumie as the unstable provocateur. And although Shapiro remained off camera, he was anything but passive. Sources confirmed he was reviewing edits personally, giving legal notes, and demanding weekly updates. Still in public, his attorney stuck to the same line like gospel. Mr. Shapiro is focused solely on protecting his privacy and personal integrity. That phrase appeared, almost verbatim, in every media appearance Thomas Lake gave. What most people didn't know, though, was that behind closed doors, the calm was a facade. 3 days after the lawsuit hit, Shapiro sat in a long private conference room inside his legal firm, scrolling through screenshots on his tablet. He turned to Lake and asked, "Why hasn't he responded yet? Is he scared or just buying time?" Lake, ever composed, replied, "He's smart. He won't show his hand early." Shapiro narrowed his eyes. "He better understand this isn't just about words. This is about respect. I'm not going to let some guy with a Twitter account and a microphone drag my name through the mud." Lake didn't answer. He knew full well what it meant to sue a man like Jonathan Roumie, a man with a massive faith-based following and a growing international presence. But he also knew Shapiro didn't care about risk. He cared about control. What they hadn't anticipated, or perhaps had underestimated, was Roumie's refusal to flinch. He didn't apologize. He didn't retract. He didn't release a video trying to soften or reframe his remarks. He simply let the story breathe, while his team did what they did best, dig. Roumie's legal counsel, Maria Delgado, had seen lawsuits like this before. Wealthy plaintiffs, vague accusations, media storms timed with courtroom filings. But she also knew one more thing. These lawsuits almost always came with skeletons. And if you waited long enough, quietly enough, someone always cracked. Maria said it plainly during a private call with Roumie. "This isn't just defamation. It feels like a warning shot." Roumie's response was just as direct. "Then let's send one back." That's when Maria made the move that would change everything. She reached out to a former communications advisor, someone who had worked not only for Shapiro's network, but also for other regional powerhouses. An insider, one who had seen firsthand how narratives were built and deployed. He had been quietly dismissed weeks earlier from a top-tier PR agency tied to Shapiro's donor base. His name wasn't public, but his message was clear. I have documents, and I have reasons to speak. No one knew yet that his words, just 9 seconds of truth, would become the fuse. But before that bomb could drop, Roumie's legal team had to prepare their foundation. Their first legal strategy session didn't happen in a government building or a Hollywood office tower. It happened in a small, rented conference room above a bakery in Echo Park. No cameras, no noise, just laptops, legal pads, and empty coffee cups. Around noon, Roumie sat with arms crossed, listening carefully to each briefing. Maria projected a basic outline, key facts, judicial precedents, essential citations, but the weight in the room was clear. They're painting you as emotional, she said, undisciplined, reckless. Then she added, but the lawsuit is weak, purposefully vague. That tells me they're counting more on public perception than legal merit. Across the table, Theo flipped through a printed thread of social media posts. Look at this, he said. Coordinated replies. Same phrasing within minutes. Half of them say, desperate actor, losing relevance. Roumie read the page silently, then placed it down. So we've got a pattern, he looked up. Now we just need one piece of intent. That's when Maria looked up, her voice calm but electric. We might already have it. Theo spread out the printed threads across the table. Look at this, he said. Coordinated replies within minutes. Half these accounts use the exact same phrasing. Desperate actor, losing control. Roumie read the page silently, then set it down. So we've got a pattern, he said. Now we just need proof of intent. Maria raised her eyes, and in that moment, the whole room changed. She closed her laptop and then reopened it slowly. We may already have it. Phones went silent. Someone shut the door with a heavy click, and the air turned still. Maria projected a summary of a call she had taken the night before. The source? An anonymous former media advisor, someone who had worked inside multiple operations, including Shapiro's. He had reached out through a trusted mutual contact in the journalism world, claiming to have access to internal documents, emails, memos, everything tied to a narrative manipulation operation launched days before the lawsuit. This wasn't hearsay. This was the architecture behind the machine. At first, Roumie was skeptical. Why would he want to help us? Maria shrugged. He said things got ugly too fast. He didn't like how quickly they turned on the wow, said he left under bad terms. Theo chimed in. Sounds like guilt. Roumie added calmly. Or maybe someone trying to wash their hands before something worse leaks. Either way, they agreed to listen. A Zoom call was arranged. No recordings, no screenshots, no names. The man's voice was firm, mature, controlled. He didn't ramble. He didn't make it personal. He simply laid it out. There was a document titled Strategic Public Retaliation. It included Jonathan Roumie's name, media targets, talking points, and a list of headlines they intended to push into the mainstream. It wasn't just Shapiro's idea, the man said, but he approved the final draft. Personally, there's a timestamp and metadata. Theo leaned forward, voice sharp. You're saying Ben Shapiro signed off on a smear campaign and then sued a public figure for responding to it? The man didn't hesitate. Yes, and I'll testify, if I'm guaranteed protection. It was a lot to process. Roumie sat in silence for a full minute, then turned to Maria. If this is true, this isn't just a lawsuit. This is a coordinated operation, and I'm not staying silent. The decision was made. The next morning, Maria filed a motion requesting the court to admit an anonymous surprise witness for the defense. The petition shook the courtroom, not because of what it said, but because of what it might reveal. Reporters speculated wildly. Shapiro's allies panicked. The presiding judge, known for swift rulings, approved the motion within 24 hours. While the media spiraled, Roumie remained calm. He continued his public appearances, spoke at 2 youth centers, even posted a short video about Grace under fire. Not once did he mention the lawsuit, but privately he was sharpening his sword. The night before the hearing, he met Theo in the parking lot of a downtown church. Theo leaned on the car hood and asked, "You sure you want to go through with this?" Roumie nodded. If they wanted silence, they should have chosen someone else. They thought the courtroom would be their turf, he added. Now they'll learn it can be mine too. The federal courthouse in San Diego didn't look like the eye of a cultural storm from the outside, but by morning the sidewalks were packed. Cameras, protesters, supporters from both sides. Ben Shapiro wasn't there. His legal team claimed he was monitoring remotely, but Jonathan Roumie was. He arrived on time, dark gray suit, no jewelry, face composed and unreadable. Flashes lit up. Microphones reached forward. Someone called his name. He didn't flinch. He didn't wave. He just walked forward, head high. Inside, the courtroom was tense but still. Spectator rows were filled. Reporters lined the back wall. On the prosecution side, Thomas Lake sat flanked by 3 attorneys, color-coded folders neatly stacked for a legal marathon. On the defense, Maria Delgado, calm and direct, Roumie at her side, a junior associate beside them, and Theo, officially a consultant, but there to keep Roumie grounded. Judge Bernice Kaplan entered on time. A former prosecutor known for decisive rulings, she scanned the room with cool authority. She didn't smile. "We begin with opening statements," she announced. Lake went first. His voice was polished and low. "Your Honor, Mr. Shapiro brings this suit not as a political figure, but as a private citizen defending his name. Mr. Roumie falsely accused him of shadow influence, with no proof, knowing the damage it would cause." He cited Roumie's TV comments, his tweet, the viral spread. Each word was measured to paint Roumie as dangerous, emotional, unstable. Then Maria stood, no notes in hand. "This case," she said, "is not about reputation. It's about power." My client answered a direct question with credible insight based on a clear pattern of conduct. This lawsuit is not a defense. It's a weapon to punish dissent and chill freedom of expression. And we will prove that Mr. Shapiro didn't just try to discredit Jonathan Roumie. He launched a covert media campaign against him before this lawsuit was even filed. At that line, Judge Kaplan raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. The witnesses began. Shapiro's team led with a digital media expert who claimed Roumie's comments led to a measurable spike in online threats against Shapiro. He showed charts, heat maps, stat sheets. During cross-examination, Maria was surgical. "Can you prove those threats came from Roumie's followers?" "Not directly." "Can you confirm he encouraged them?" "No." "So you're saying he spoke and the internet did what the internet does?" The witness hesitated. "In a way, which yes, not a win, but definitely not a loss." Next up, a behavioral analyst who claimed Roumie's tone during the panel was provocative, emotionally loaded, and designed to incite. It felt more like a motivational TED Talk than an expert analysis. Even Judge Kaplan looked annoyed. Maria objected twice. One objection was sustained. Meanwhile, Roumie stayed silent, focused, taking notes. He hadn't yet become the center of the trial. But the tension in the room tightened every time his name was spoken. Every time a clip or tweet of his was played, every eye turned to him, every camera zoomed in, and everyone, prosecution, defense, judge, and jury, felt the shift coming. All eyes were on him. As the day wore on, every glance, every camera lens in the courtroom drifted toward Jonathan Roumie. He sat composed, but the weight was growing. Near the end of the session, Judge Kaplan called a short recess. Lawyers retreated to their corners. Roumie stayed seated, still, quiet. That's when Theo's phone buzzed. He read the message, passed it to Maria without a word. She blinked once, then leaned over to Jonathan and whispered, "He accepted. He's going to testify." Roumie didn't move. He just exhaled, slow and steady. The surprise witness had agreed, and he wasn't coming quietly. He was coming with everything. The court wasn't ready, but Roumie was. By 8 a.m. the next morning, the courtroom was electric with speculation. The night before, word had leaked. The defense would call an unnamed surprise witness, unannounced, sealed, confidential. Online forums buzzed with theories. Was it a former staffer? A disillusioned insider? A rogue journalist? Nobody guessed correctly. Judge Kaplan entered promptly, clearly aware of the media storm, but unmoved by it. "Proceed," she ordered firmly. Maria Delgado stood, voice steady. "Your Honor, the defense calls Mr. Gabriel Salinas." A hush fell across the room. Chairs shifted, heads turned. Reporters scrambled to whisper his name into phones. Gabriel Salinas wasn't famous, but for those who understood political media machines, his name meant something. He had worked in the shadows, never on camera, never quoted, but always present. A strategic advisor, a quiet architect. He'd served multiple administrations, including Shapiro's empire. Now he stepped into the light. navy suit, thin glasses, composed posture. He took the stand, was sworn in, and folded his hands in his lap. Maria approached with care. "Mr. Salinas, can you tell the court your last professional role?" "Until February of this year," he said calmly, "I was lead media consultant at Connexa Strategies. Before that, I served as director of special communication projects for various political clients, including Ben Shapiro." Thomas Lake was on his feet instantly. "Objection. Irrelevant." Judge Kaplan didn't even blink. "Overruled? Continue." Maria nodded. "Mr. Salinas, during your time at Connexa Strategies, did you have knowledge of a communications campaign targeting Mr. Roumie?" "Yes." The courtroom shifted. You could feel the air thicken. "Was Mr. Ben Shapiro involved in that campaign?" "Yes." The gallery rustled. Reporters leaned forward. Cameras zoomed in. "How was he involved?" Salinas leaned slightly closer to the mic. "He personally approved a memo titled Strategic Public Retaliation. It outlined talking points, targeted media partners, and a list of priority objectives, one of which was Jonathan Roumie." Lake was back on his feet. "Objection. The term retaliation is inflammatory." Kaplan raised her hand. "He's quoting the document. Sit down." Salinas continued, calm, almost detached now. The memo detailed specific language to use when referring to Mr. Roumie. Terms like unstable, obsessed, and discredited were recommended. It included timelines for media releases, coordinated tweets, and partner influencers prepped to echo the narrative. Ben Shapiro reviewed and approved the final version. Maria paused, then asked, "How long before this lawsuit was filed did Mr. Shapiro approve that memo?" 3 weeks, 9 seconds. That's how long it took to shatter everything. What had once appeared to be a defamation response now looked like something else. A trap. A coordinated media ambush. Signed, sealed, and orchestrated before Roumie had said a word on that panel. Lake tried to shake Salinas on cross-examination. He questioned motives, loyalty, money. "Are you testifying for political reasons?" "No." "Have you been offered any compensation?" "Not a cent." "Then why are you here?" Salinas looked him in the eye. "Because there's a line, and I watched them cross it." The room froze. Judge Kaplan called a lunch recess. No one moved. It was as if those 9 seconds needed time to settle, into the walls, into every journalist's notepad, into every advisor's silent thoughts. Roumie remained seated, staring ahead, then leaned toward Maria and whispered, "They walked in thinking this was my downfall." She smiled softly. "Turns out, they built their case on their own mistake." The press hadn't even finished writing the quotes, but the impact had already detonated. After lunch, the silence in the courtroom was even heavier. This wasn't calm, it was weight. No whispers from reporters. Even the bailiff seemed uneasy. When Judge Kaplan returned, she adjusted her glasses and cleared her throat. "Let me be very clear. Mr. Salinas' testimony carries significant implications. I expect both parties to proceed with precision." Maria stood again, one folder in hand, no notes. She didn't need them anymore. Salinas had set the case ablaze. Now it was time to make sure nothing was missed. "Your Honor," she began, "we present into evidence the internal memo referenced by Mr. Salinas. It is dated February 9th. It bears the signature of Mr. Ben Shapiro. It contains 3 pages of strategy explicitly aimed at discrediting Mr. Roumie. Furthermore," she continued, "we have metadata proving that 2 members of Mr. Shapiro's private team accessed and modified the document within 40 hours of Mr. Roumie's televised appearance." Lake didn't object. There was nothing left to object to. Maria handed the memo to the court clerk. The clerk passed it to Judge Kaplan. She read the first page in silence, no expression. She turned each page slowly. At the final one, she looked up and asked neutrally, "Does the plaintiff know this document exists?" Lake stood carefully. "Your Honor, we are in the process of reviewing the authenticity of the document, and we reserve the right to respond formally once our forensics team completes its analysis." But it no longer mattered. The court wasn't waiting, because what came next wasn't legal. It was perception, and perception moves faster than due process. By the end of the day, the memo had already leaked. It didn't matter if it came from someone in the gallery, a nervous aide, or a panicked strategist. It was online. Screenshots flooded Twitter. Reddit threads dissected every line. News anchors read it live on air. And one phrase from the memo shot to the top of trending, hashtags, hashtag strategic public retaliation. One commentator put it bluntly, "This is like Watergate, only with better lighting." Another joked, "They tried to silence an actor and accidentally gave him the stage." The phrase strategic public retaliation was trending in under 30 minutes. Anchors read it aloud during primetime broadcasts. Clips of Gabriel Salinas' testimony flooded every major platform. And one commentator said what everyone was thinking. This is like Watergate, but with better lighting. Another quipped, they tried to silence a man of faith and accidentally gave him a pulpit. In the courthouse parking lot, Roumie sat in the back seat of a dark-tinted SUV. Theo climbed in beside him and handed him his phone. Mentions, mentions, mentions. Jonathan Roumie's name was everywhere. Support poured in from all directions. Old allies resurfaced. Even those who had disagreed with his positions began to defend him. Not because they agreed with his beliefs, but because they saw what had happened. A powerful man tried to crush a critic and got caught red-handed. Roumie looked out the window and murmured, I didn't want this to be about me. I wanted people to see the game behind the curtain, how stories get moved like chess pieces. Theo leaned forward, his voice low. Well, they're watching now. Inside Shapiro's team, everything had changed. Phones went unanswered. Press statements were delayed. One assistant was rumored to have quit on the spot. Thomas Lake canceled 2 television interviews and released a vague statement blaming coordinated political attacks. No one believed it, because those 9 seconds, clear, deliberate, authenticated, had made the truth undeniable. This wasn't about protection, it was about vengeance, about control, and it had backfired. The next morning, the crowd outside the courthouse had doubled. Protesters and supporters lined up again, but the signs were different now. Truth isn't defamation. Power fears accountability. Roumie was right, and Roumie entered the courthouse as he always did. Quiet, composed, steady. But this time he wasn't walking into the fire. He was walking through it, still standing. The trial wasn't over, but the public verdict had already been written. When court resumed, the entire tone had shifted. Shapiro's legal team no longer moved like a confident unit. They looked more like crisis consultants than attorneys. Gone was the air of superiority. They walked slowly, whispered frequently, checked their phones compulsively. And Ben Shapiro? Still no sign of him. He hadn't made a single public appearance since Salinas testified. No video, no statement, not even a photo. Rumors swirled. He had fired 2 advisors, flown back to Los Angeles, even argued with his own family. No one could confirm anything, but the silence only made it worse. Judge Kaplan entered and opened the session firmly. This case is still active, she said, and I will not tolerate theatrical tactics from either side. But by now, the damage had already spilled out beyond the courtroom walls. Maria Delgado stood again, calm and composed. Your Honor, in light of yesterday's testimony, we respectfully move to dismiss this case on grounds of malicious prosecution. Additionally, we request a formal investigation into the misuse of judicial processes as a tool for political retaliation. Thomas Lake didn't even stand. He walked to the microphone and said flatly, we object to that characterization and reserve our response until our team completes its review of the evidence presented. Delay tactics. Everyone in the room knew it, but the oxygen had already escaped their case. What began as a bold legal strike now stood propped up by paperwork and stalling. Reporters had already written their headlines by noon. Shapiro lawsuit crumbles after memo leak. Strategic retaliation memo confirms orchestrated smear campaign. Roumie turns defense into national reckoning. Outside, chaos. People who had never watched a court case in their lives were glued to live streams. Students, retirees, workers on their lunch breaks. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone had a quote. The memo was downloaded, annotated, circulated, even taught. In a bar in Brooklyn, 2 middle-aged men stared at the TV. You see this? One of them said. They tried to use the system to punish a guy for saying what everyone's been thinking. His friend nodded slowly. They tried, and he burned them. It wasn't just defeat, it was humiliation. Not for losing a case, but for losing the narrative. For a media empire that had controlled public opinion for years, this was personal. In Roumie's world, the consequences weren't political. They were human, emotional, real. That night, he sat in the back of his father's pickup truck. 2 old lawn chairs, a blanket in the bed. Above them, the quiet sky over Los Angeles. His father handed him a bottle of soda. How do you feel? He asked. Roumie took a long sip, shrugged. Not like I won, just tired. His father nodded. That's what truth does. Doesn't scream, just weighs on you. Roumie let the words linger. He had never wanted a spotlight. He only wanted people to see what happens behind closed doors. how power and wealth are used to punish those who speak out of line. His father looked at him. Now they know, because you didn't fold. And it was true, he hadn't backed down. But he had paid for it. Friends were calling nonstop. Former colleagues wanted interviews. A network had offered him a primetime special. He declined it all. For the first time in weeks, he just wanted silence. Theo, on the other hand, never stopped. He was already compiling a digital archive. Every court document, every media mention, every quote from the memo. Maybe he wanted to turn it into a case study, or maybe something bigger. He didn't say, but one evening he leaned over to Roumie and asked, "What if this isn't the end? What if this is just the first warning shot?" Roumie answered in a whisper, "Then we'll be ready for the next one, just like we were for this one." But beneath that quiet strength, there was something deeper, a sadness, not for himself, but for the world around him. "People shouldn't have to be brave just to tell the truth," Roumie said one afternoon. "But somehow, that's become the cost." Theo nodded, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Privately, Roumie thought often about Gabriel Salinas. What made him speak up? What did he risk? He never got to thank him. The lawyers kept them apart to avoid accusations of collusion, but he hoped Salinas knew. Those 9 seconds had done more than shake a courtroom. They had pulled back the curtain, and now the world could see the machine behind the polished smiles, the crafted statements, the cold machinery of reputation warfare disguised as civility. The machine had worn a suit of civility, but even after the dust settled, one chapter remained, and it no longer belonged just to Jonathan Roumie or Ben Shapiro. It belonged to all of us. Because when power strikes without truth, the only real question is, whose side are we on? 2 weeks after Judge Kaplan formally dismissed the lawsuit, Jonathan Roumie stood in a modest high school gym in Santa Ana. He wasn't there as an actor, or a public figure, or even a recent headline. He was there as someone who had walked through fire and come out still standing. No stage lighting, no teleprompter. He leaned against the podium, no notes, no script. "You don't have to be perfect to defend what you believe," he told the students. "You just have to know why you're standing." The gym fell completely silent. No one whispered. No one looked at their phones. Only wide eyes and still hands. One student raised his hand and asked, "Were you afraid?" Roumie paused, then answered honestly, "Yes, but not for me, for what it means. When people with money and power think they can decide what truth is just by suing someone." That gym wasn't a courtroom. It wasn't national television, but it mattered because the story had escaped the legal walls and entered homes, classrooms, barbershops, WhatsApp groups, and it stayed there. The court of law had ruled in Roumie's favor, but the court of public conscience had gone further. The case had become a warning and a mirror. It showed how easily speech can be punished when those who speak aren't prepared for the consequences. In the following weeks, 3 more public figures came forward, not with lawsuits, but with stories of pressure, of media targeting, of whisper campaigns funded by deep pockets and long shadows. Salinas' name returned again, this time in an op-ed titled, "Truth Costs More Than Silence." He didn't speak about the case. He spoke about fear, about the machine, and why he chose to walk away from it. The memo he provided, it became part of the public record, studied, archived. Even a handful of law schools began including Roumie versus Shapiro in their syllabi. Under courses on lawfare, how lawsuits aren't always meant to win, but to wear people down. As for Shapiro, he slowly disappeared from the conversation. No press, no new interviews, just a short statement from his office. "We have decided to move forward and focus on positive endeavors." But people didn't forget, not because of who he was, but because of what he tried to do and how he failed. Inside Roumie's small production office, life went on. Projects to read, events to prepare for, communities to serve. But everything had changed. People who once stayed silent now approached him. A mother from Santa Tecla sent a handwritten letter. "Thank you for defending us when most of us feel too small to speak." Roumie folded the letter and slipped it into his portfolio, not because it made him proud, but because it reminded him of what was at stake. One night, Theo stepped into his office while Roumie was still working. He placed a folder on the desk. "What's this?" Roumie asked. "Your next invitation. Georgetown wants you to give a lecture next month." Roumie raised an eyebrow. "Me? Teach?" Theo grinned. "Looks like they finally figured out you've got something worth saying." Roumie smiled, tired but full. "Let's hope they're ready to hear it." And that's the truth. This wasn't just about winning a lawsuit. It was about what happens after. what people remember, what they carry forward. This case taught something deeper. Truth doesn't always shout louder than money, but if someone, anyone, stands up for it, even for one moment, it can live long enough to be heard. So next time someone in power tries to silence a voice with the weight of a courtroom, they might think twice, not because of fear, but because that tactic no longer works the same way. People are paying attention now, and maybe, just maybe, that's the real change. If you believe the truth matters, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's hard, subscribe. This won't be the last story like it, but if you're listening, it won't be ignored. Thank you.